Hello, I'm Donal McCauley and welcome to medicsvoices.com. Today we're in Vancouver, Canada, and I'm talking to Ruth Elwood Martin. Now, Ruth, although you're in Canada, that's not where you started, because I think you started in the UK. Tell us all about your earlier life.
Oh my goodness. Well, I grew up in Manchester. My father was a public health officer, medical officer of health is what they called it in those days. And I was the oldest of 5 kids. Yeah, and they really wanted me to go to the local university for my education. And I was a bit of a rebel. And I said, no, 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 I need to go away. So I ended up applying for a scholarship that took me to UBC. So my poor parents said goodbye to me and I hopped on a plane and ended up at UBC doing undergraduate microbiology, and then from there went into medicine
I
at
didn't
UBC.
realize it was really quite as early as that. I mean, you were a bit of a rebel. So tell me about your early days in UBC and then why you decided to do medicine.
I think medicine was sort of in my blood almost. My father was the oldest of 5 boys, and they all had ended up in medicine, but all quite different fields. So my dad was in public health, and then there was an uncle who was an epidemiologist, and an uncle who was a general practitioner. And so, I kind of had this sort of idealized view of what one does when one gets older. As an adult, you go into medicine. And I think initially I had thought maybe a vet because I preferred animals to people, but it kind of changed. So, why as a young person do you decide on something? It's obviously a lot of family influences. But once you get into medical school, you realize there is so much opportunity here as a person in medicine. And I think I was really drawn to family medicine through my career because of the mentors that I met in medical school and the amazing work and how much I enjoyed doing work in family doctor offices. So, for me, the actual studying anatomy and pathology, I found a little bit overwhelming. But once I got into the doctor's offices and listening to patient stories, it was kind of came alive to me in terms of where my heart was in terms of listening to people and solving their problems with them.
So did you go into family medicine then directly?
Yeah. So I did medical school at UBC, and then I did family medicine at UBC. Then I met somebody, so I ended up, staying here instead of traveling elsewhere. And and did family medicine for many years in Vancouver and had little children and was juggling that life of small kids and family medicine, running basically at that time, there weren't many options for family medicine besides running a private practice. So it was fee for service, running a business. And then I got to age 40 and thought, there is a lot about medicine I love, but I do not like running a business. And I had a nurse friend who said, Ruth, you need to get a sessional job where you just go in and do a session and leave and get a salary, and rather than this running a business thing that you have to do in family medicine. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I started inquiring about sessional jobs in medicine, and I heard about this vacancy at the women's prison. They needed a sessional doctor. And initially I thought, oh, they must be desperate. And I didn't go to medical school to go to a prison. Like, it must be the lowest of the low. They're desperate. They can't get anybody else. But something persisted in me that, there's a need here. And you asked about my upbringing. I mean, I was raised in the Christian faith, and there's a famous verse that says, if you visit somebody in prison, it says, as if you're visiting Jesus. And I thought, well, maybe I should give it a try. I should go and see what this clinic is like. And so I trotted off to the women's prison. And I mean, I think probably the first day I was there, I saw more diagnoses of serious illnesses that had not been attended to than probably a year of working in family medicine in Vancouver. And I sort of knew, okay, this is my calling. This is what I have to do for the rest of my life. I have to work with people in prison. The prison, you have this range of people from people who are in and out on remand, so they've not been sentenced, so they're in for a very short time. And as they get in and out, they drop through the cracks of any healthcare system that we have. Or then you also have people who are in for longer sentences. So you have a real range of stays. So therefore you have a range of opportunities to actually offer healthcare for women who might not otherwise have it. So yeah, I was in there for life, as it were.
Well, you started off then, I guess, in sort of clinical practice in the prison, but then that evolved a bit.
Yeah, so I started off obviously in clinical practice. Now, at that time, I had been in family medicine for quite a while in the community, and I was still working in my practice in the community, but I was working part-time in this session job. And in family medicine, as a young family physician, again, that sense of being overwhelmed by the diversity of things you were seeing. And I got really interested in family practice research because I felt for every patient encounter was generating for me a question about how can we improve this health? And if you actually looked in the literature for the answer to whatever question it was that was arising, you realized the answer wasn't there. So I had got involved really through the encouragement of the head of the Department of Family Practice at UBC in a practice-based network in North America called Aspen. And I used to go once a year to their gathering and generate all these research questions, and I'd come back with little cards that basically with a research question, and every time you saw a patient that had that condition, you could punch in you could write in pencil in these little cards the things you were seeing, the symptoms you were seeing. So it was a way of gathering data on a large denominator of patients on very common conditions that you see in family medicine that otherwise you can't do research on when you're just in a single clinic. So, I'd always had this passion for sort of doing research. Well, my goodness, when I started in the women's prison, and then I started looking at the literature for answers to the questions I was seeing, because the conditions that you face in patients that are coming into prison are enormous. And so it was sobering to realize, in Canada anyway, at that time, there was nothing written, very, very little written about the health of people in prison. There was more being published in Europe and the UK. So I actually got involved in the World Health Organization Health in Prison project, even so it's basically based in Europe. And I would say, can I come? I'll be the Canadian observer, but can I come? Because I found that quite inspirational. But I also thought, okay, I'm going to start doing some research here in order to see if we can improve health. And I thought, well, the thing that I could tackle maybe out of all these vast array of conditions would be cervical cancer screening. I had just casually done some pap smears and found quite a number of women with serious dysplasia and realized they hadn't had pap smears for a long time. So I ended up doing, what did I do first? I think I volunteered. So when I talked to the governance of the healthcare clinic in the prison, they sort of said, the women are in and out with short sentences. Our job really is to keep them alive. It's not to do preventative work. And I said, well, look, here's an opportunity for them to have pap smears, because now women have got, at least they've got housing and they've got food, and they're coming into the clinic and saying, I want to look after my health. And here's an opportunity to actually improve, to meet their requests. So I think I volunteered coming in to do pap smears. I mean, I said, look, I'll come in the evenings. When my kids are in bed, I'll come in the evening and I'll offer pap smears. So during that first year of doing pap smears, I then talked to the cancer agency in Vancouver, because they had a cytology registry of all the population in Vancouver. And I was able to look at the pap smear results we had in the year of doing them in the prison and compare them to age-matched controls. I'd never done this stuff before, but I downloaded EpiInfo and I kind of figured out how to do it. And there was a wonderful person at the cancer agency, Greg Hislop, who sort of mentored me through it. But we looked at the women in prison were like 11 times more likely to have abnormalities than the age-matched population. And, hadn't, like 98% of them hadn't had a pap smear in the last 3 years compared to like 45% of the population or something like that. It was dramatic. So I was like, wow, this is evidence that we need to improve pap smear screening in the prison. Published a paper, which is my first ever, and then took that, you know, to the powers that be in the prison and said, look, you know, this is proof that we need to do something.
Then at what stage then did you look for sort of formal research training?
I realized I hadn't had any formal training. I mean, I taught myself IP-info, and I'd sort of probably absorbed some of it through my uncles, but I hadn't really kind of done any. So I started doing a Masters of Public Health online with the University of Manchester. And it was great because I could study it in the evening when my kids were in bed, and it worked really well doing it online. I mean, the first course I took, because I started in January, they only had a few courses that were offered. And the first course I took was participatory action research. And as I took that course, I thought, oh my goodness, this is what we should be doing in the women's prison. And so my assignment, they had to do an assignment, was based on my experience at the prison. So at that time, we had just published, you know, several papers. We had got money for an intervention to do a cervical cancer screening intervention. We'd hired a nurse to do more pap smears. We'd looked at those results. We compared them. And we realized once women get released from prison, they actually are not interested in continuing with their pap smears, even though they might have had a great experience in the prison with a wonderful nurse who was offering pap smears. And it obviously wasn't a priority for them to get pap smear screening regularly. And as I'm doing this participatory research course, I'm realizing, okay, what we should be doing is actually inviting the women themselves to tell us what they would like to research. So participatory research, this course was participatory action research, but I realize in different countries, it's got slightly different nuances and different terms. So it's sometimes used community-based participatory research or participatory health research, but they're all kind of similar things. And that, you know, the process of doing participatory health research is that you invite the people that you want to research to be involved in the whole process of doing the research. So you invite them to be part of generating the questions, but also then part of developing the methods and gathering the data and interpreting the data and presenting the data. And so if it's done properly, and it's sort of an iterative process that's based on relationships, you have the involved in generating new research questions together and new knowledge together, but there's also a mutual kind of transformation or knowledge sharing. It's very reciprocal in all the players in the research process, and it inevitably leads to some sort of action. So the action is very integrated into the whole process of doing participatory research. So here am I doing this course thinking, oh my, this is what we should be doing in the prison. And I got to the end of that course and had a conversation with somebody I met at the College of Family Physicians of Canada. And I explained I'd just done this course and I was really excited. And I thought maybe this was the kind of research we should do in the prison. And she said, well, if you decide to do that, I will come out to Vancouver and mentor you in that process. So she had done community-based participatory research in Saskatoon, in inner city. So Dr. Viv Ramsden. And then the other person that I met with was Dr. Anne Macaulay, who works out of McGill and had done CBPR with Indigenous communities that she worked with as a GP. So there was two people that said, I've done this. Yes, I'll support you. That gave me enough confidence to start off. So, and then obviously you can't just walk into a prison and say, I want to do participatory research. You do need people to be involved in it. So the first step was to talk to the warden. I guess in UK you'd call them governors, or in Ireland a governor. So I talked to Brenda Toll about this idea, and she said, well, that is a very interesting way of doing research. And she said, it completely fits with my view of what a women's prison should be in terms of being a therapeutic community. So yes, I would support that. And then I talked with the recreation therapist in the prison, a woman called Alison Granger Brown, and she was quite a champion and was was a wonderful sort of asset and had good relationships with many of the women who were in the prison. Everybody sort of loved Alison and Alison's office and the things she would do with the women. And so she again was supportive. And then the other person I realized was very important to engage with, because there is very tragically a high percentage of women are Indigenous in the women's prison, was the Indigenous elder. So again, I talked with her and she was quite suspicious. Like, the experience of Indigenous people in Canada is, people come and research, and it's just research is a dirty R word. But when I explained to Holy Cow, that's her name, the process of research, she was actually interested in being involved. So that sort of set the stage for kind of moving forward with this idea.
Well, you make it sound very straightforward, but boy, that was really radical stuff. That was really exciting research.
I think so.
Research at the margins. And you went on to do some fascinating work with women and women with their babies and women in solitary confinement. Really interesting. Tell it more about that.
Well, really it started with this research, right? So because and it was transformational for me, because what I realized was that when you actually are working in this way with women, they're driving the agenda, right? So first of all, I had a bit of funding, so to hire a student over the summer to meet one-on-one with women to say, what would you like to research if we did this participatory research, and how do you think it would look? And then she also interviewed some correctional officers and some nurses in focus groups. And then in the fall, we had this data from all these interviews, and there was no, what do you call it, convergence. It was all like so many ideas. So Viv Ramsden, the mentor from Saskatoon, said, if you're going to apply for funding, you have to bring all this data back to the women to actually ask them to help sort it out. Like, how are we going to decide what to pick? She said, you need to ask the warden if we could have a prison-wide forum, a research forum, where we could actually discuss this data. So so I asked the warden, and she said, sure, let's close down the prison. All the women don't have to do their prison work. They can come to the research forum for the day. I'll give the women in the kitchen the day off. We can order in pizza, and we'll have all the correctional officers come too. It was like this gift. So October 2005, October 15th, 2005. And so a number of colleagues from UBC came also for the day, and it was in the gym. And we started off the day. I had invited the Indigenous elder to come and open the research forum. And she arrived and she asked us all to stand around the gym and hold hands. And she stood in the middle, and she pulled the prison chaplain beside her. So the two of them stood in the middle. She opened the research day with prayer in Cree and then translated to English, and then invited the chaplain to open in prayer. So I'm thinking, this is a research forum, but that set the stage for saying, this is not just about physical health, it's about emotional health and social health and spiritual health. And then Viv kind of had mentored me about what are we going to do for this day. We started, and there was a power outage, so we had an emergency generator going, and we had a karaoke machine for the microphone. And so we started by just summarizing, well, not summarizing, but actually going through all of the responses to the summer students' work, like what would you like to research? And we kind of went through all those. And then it was like an open mic that the Indigenous elder held for the women, and they all came up to the mic one at a time. It was like a talking stick, to talk about what they were interested in researching. And I mean, it went on and on and on. And people were so excited about the possibility of getting involved in this research. And we had pizza. There was breaks for drumming to, smoke breaks, because at the time you could smoke. So we had to go outside and smoke. And then you came back in, and we decided to actually focus on this, putting together this funding application to group women into 5 groups. We thought there were maybe 5 main categories. So one was HIV, hepatitis, and hepatitis B, I think, and STDs. And I thought that was the most important one that we should be focusing on. One was on relationship with mother and children and family. And one was getting ready for leaving prison and being ready to meet the outside world. And one was healthcare in prison. And so as women came back from lunch, we said you could choose which group you wanted to go into to actually discuss in more depth. And can you imagine which one most of the women went to? It was, relationship with their children. It was like this was so key to who they were as women in prison. Most of them, were not in touch with their children. Their children were in foster care or they had been taken away. Indigenous women, there's a family history of residential schools. So anyway, that was my first sort of wake-up call in terms of participatory research. Is the things that I think are really important are not priority for people who are being researched. They tell you what's important. So through then the research process, we didn't get the funding application. We worked for 2 weeks and the warden gave us lots of permissions to take time off to do this work. And 17 women helped us pull together that funding application. And then, 6 months later, we found we didn't get it. But by then, the women had gone to the warden to say, this research is so important to us. We don't need research funding. We can keep doing this research. You just need to give us time off to do research. So doing research in the prison became one of the work placement kind of things that women could choose to do. And I mean, I was there 1 day or 2 days a week. 2 days a week, I was sort of volunteering in the research office, but most of the week they were there on their own, figuring out how to do research.
What's absolutely fascinating about that story is how you describe you went in with your agenda, but participatory research actually changes that agenda to that of the participants. But you moved on beyond that and you took it further because you took a legal case on behalf of the women.
That was many years later.
Yeah, tell us how you got there in that process.
So, as I mentioned, the warden was really innovative as well. And so, while we were doing participatory research, she was also implementing various measures in the prison. And one of the ones was working quite closely with the BC Women's Hospital to see of a way so that women, when they deliver their babies in the hospital, could bring their babies back to the prison with her. And so that was innovative for a provincial prison in Canada. And so that was happening. So we had then babies in the prison at this time. So it was a phenomenal place to be. And so after we'd been doing participatory research for about 2 years, this warden was moved sideways. A new warden was brought in. And I won't go into all the details of why this happened, but suddenly everything got shut down because there was a change in climate at the ministry level. And so the mother-baby program unit was closed, the participatory research was stopped, and the recreational therapy was stopped. It was probably one of the most stressful times of my life to sort of watch this. So I'm in the prison clinic, and now I'm still continuing to care for pregnant women, but having to tell them that it's likely they won't be able to bring their babies back. And I was devastated but furious. So I think I don't know how many, I just certainly wrote a very, very long letter. I worked with BC Women's Hospital to get them to write a long letter to the ministry to explain about the health benefits of keeping babies with their mothers, about the bonding and about the breastfeeding and about the health impacts of separating. And once you've taken a newborn baby from its mother, you will not reestablish breastfeeding. It's just so. And then we also worked at evaluating the health impacts of the babies that had been in the prison. So there had been 9 babies in the prison over those 3 years. And, you know, all of them had breastfed. They had been released with their mothers, and they were, as far as we could tell, in the community doing quite well. So it was, so then women who were then in the prison who were being separated from their babies found their way to a lawyer who then took it on as a charter case, basically talking about the charter rights of a baby to stay with its mother, and or how violating the charter to take a baby away from its mother just because the mother's in prison. And so in that, I think that took about 5 years to get to court. And they needed an expert witness, of course. By then, I think I had stopped working at the prison, so it was easier for me to get involved in the legal case. And and that was successful.
So that, in a sense, changed the world of prisons for many, many women.
I think so. I mean, what I then realized, it's like when you actually publish a paper and you think it's going to change the health trajectory. Once you've got something passed in court and it's made law, you think it's going to change. But in fact, maybe it has a bit, in the sense that I think judges are reluctant to incarcerate pregnant women. But in fact, the mother-baby unit that actually was officially opened to great fanfare following the court case, or reopened, I should say, I don't think has had that many babies in it, because the corrections would prefer to have the woman released from prison rather than actually have the baby in prison, which is fair enough. Providing you've got community support, it's a great thing. But yes, I think so. I mean, and certainly federally, there is a mother-child unit that is operating. But I think in terms of you're looking at the best interests of the child, the best interest of the child probably is that mother's not in prison in the first place, which of course we all agree with.
Now, let me ask you about something different, because I was going to say you've written 2 books, but maybe that's not the right way to describe them. Tell me about these books.
I think the books came about after I'd stopped working at the prison and after the warden had been moved on and the prison had changed to become more of a traditional prison. We realized that we needed to let the world know what is possible in a prison. And so a number of us started gathering together, and we had a lot of writing that had emerged from the prison health research project in the prison that went on for 2 years. Women did a lot of writing, life stories and paragraphs of passion, and conducted a lot of surveys. And we weren't able to publish all of that in academic journals. It's hard to capture that, as you know, in CMAJ, or, that journals don't quite know what to do with participatory health research. So we thought that we came up with the idea of a book. And originally we were going to call it The Little Prison That Could, but it kind of morphed into something called Arresting Hope. And so I was a co-editor of that book, along with Mo Kuczynski, who emerged really through this process as quite a leader. She's also an artist, and she's a writer. And then the other 2 people were people I'd met through the Faculty of Education, because some of the grants we'd initiated were interdisciplinary grants. And so these were Faculty of Education that were really passionate about helping with this work. So Carl Lego, who's now sadly deceased, but he was an academic poet. And Lynn Fells was Faculty of Education, and she had done a lot of publishing and writing on educational insights. So Carl, Lynn, myself, and Mo basically ended up as co-editing this first book, which is called Arresting Hope. It's got women's stories, it's got poems, it's got illustrations, and Mo's illustrations. In each chapter it starts off with me sort of writing in a journal. So I'm writing as the physician going into the prison, and then doing a little bit of the background of the thing. So we have a chapter on mothers and babies in prison. We have a chapter on the participatory health research, a chapter on Indigenous learning, a chapter on before prison. So yeah, it was Yeah, so it's actually, so it's got a lot of voices, a lot of contributing authors of women who were in the prison, who wrote, and who are happy to be part of this book. So yeah, and then once we'd published that, people would read it, and I'd have people come to my door and say, "Can I volunteer in the prison? I want to help. You know, how can I help?" So in fact, all the proceeds of this book go towards educational bursaries for women who've experienced incarceration and their children. One of the things that women said when we were doing the participatory research is that they should sentence us to education. We need better education in order to get healthy. And then when that was published, people would ask, well, what happened to the women after they got out? You know, what's life like for them now? So then we worked on this book, which is Releasing Hope, which is the next one, which is a bit fatter. It was harder to write because it was women are now outside experiencing the barriers that they face when they get released from prison, and the incredible barriers. And so, you know, we knew it was going to be more of a sort of angry book. Like it was harder to write. Many women, many men and women released from prison end up, you know, dying of overdose. They relapse into their, you know, it's a hard life and very, very tragic. But again, the participatory health research continued in the community after it was shut down in the prison, and is continuing to this day. So one of the projects that came out of it, when in the prison, women said, what we need is somebody to hold our hand when we first get out for the first few days. We just need somebody to help us and navigate how to find housing, how to get a doctor, how to get clothing, how to get reestablished in society, because we're so anxious when we leave the gates. And so Unlocking the Gates Society was formed at first as a knowledge translation project with funding, and now it's actually a society, and it's led by women who were incarcerated, and they do peer health mentoring for women coming out. So again, in this book, Releasing Hope, we talk about how that happened and how Unlocking the Gates now is sort of an ongoing result of the original participatory health research.
Well, you described how difficult it is for people when they get out of prison, and inevitably some people have problems. But my final question is just about the people who made a tremendous success as part of your work.
Oh, there's so many of them. I mean, that's just, and we're still in touch. Yeah, so women have gone on to get their education. You know, our leaders in their community have connected with their family and their children. Yeah, it's wonderful actually to see. I mean, it's and I'm journeying with them as friends and colleagues. We're going to embark on another book actually. We're just starting on it, and it's maybe going to be called Raising Hope, but it's basically describing the voice, the stories of the children and the children of incarcerated parents, which really is a sort of forgotten population. But yeah, so, you know, was it the participatory health research in the prison that helped sort of propel these stories and this success? You know, maybe I'd like to think so, but it's been a real privilege for me to be involved in this work. You know, I think through all this, I've become a bit of an abolitionist in the sense that, you know, prison is not the right place for people. And if we can keep people, you know, it's a tragic reality of our society. And but if we are doing prison, then we should be doing it in a therapeutic way that actually helps men and women so that they're better equipped for when they come out to face the realities of our harsh society. Yeah.
Ruth, it's been an incredible privilege for me to hear your story, and there's no doubt you are an inspirational pioneer, and that's been fabulous work. Thank you very much for sharing it with us today and for your continued work. It's been an enormous pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you, Donald. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.